This is Stigma, where we talk with leaders from many industries about how mental health and addiction have impacted their lives. Many people suffer silently from mental illness, addiction, depression, anxiety, and trauma. They never seek help because of stigma. In this podcast, host Stephen Hayes and his guests share their stories of recovery in order to encourage others to do the same. Here's Stephen.
Welcome back to another episode of the Stigma podcast. I'm really excited for today's episode because my guest, Elizabeth Horner, has a very similar story to mine. We both suffer from bipolar. She's a psychiatric nurse who works with patients on a daily basis that have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, borderline personality disorder, and among other conditions. She's a writer. She recently wrote a blog on the NAMI website called Coming Out with Bipolar, which is what we're going to talk about today. And she's here today to really talk about that decision to come out to her friends and to her family, her thought process, the way she went about it. And I'm hoping that that's going to be a great resource for a lot of people out there. There's a couple of ways to find her writing and connect with her. I'll share that in the show notes. But without further ado, thank you, Elizabeth, for coming on today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
I'd love to start by having you kind of tell your story, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. I'm a psychiatric nurse, a mother of four wild boys, and I happen to live with bipolar disorder. You know, I had kept this private for years until I suddenly kind of decided to come out and share my story on my personal blog and share it for everybody to see.
And when did you first get diagnosed with bipolar?
I was first diagnosed back when I was about 19, so almost 20 years ago. But I had been having symptoms, before the diagnosis for years.
What were some of those symptoms, and kind of how long was that period between you realizing that you maybe something was going on and asking for help or seeing a psychiatrist? Right. I guess I began having symptoms back in high school when I was about 16, 17. I just remember it was a very rough time. I had no idea what was happening to me. I remember kind of staying up all night, feverishly writing poetry and short stories all throughout the night, and then flying out of bed in the morning to go to school with only a couple of hours sleep. And that would continue for weeks. I was unable to focus on my classes because I was busy coming up with all these grandiose plans of how I was going to make $1 million. Right. These classic kind of mania symptoms. At the time, some people thought I was abusing drugs, which I wasn't, at that time, but I felt very out of control until I eventually crashed into this deep depression. During that time, I lost friends because I withdrew. That's one of my main symptoms. And I just wanted to sleep all the time. And then at that point, my mother took me to a therapist who wanted to send me to a psychiatrist for depression. And when the subject of medication came up, I think my parents were just very afraid of that and didn't want to go that route. So I really suffered for quite a while. And it wasn't until I was 19 and I decided to move to California that things really started to kind of spiral out of control. I was away from home. I did begin abusing recreational drugs and alcohol to manage my symptoms, which was a complete disaster. And things continued to spiral until I was, it wasn't until I was in another deep depressive episode that I finally reached out to my dad and said, I want to die. I can't live like this anymore. And he found me a psychiatrist who then diagnosed me with bipolar. Yeah, that sounds similar to my experience. I mean, I suffered from this from a really long time, and I tried to medicate it with alcohol and drugs, and that led me to a really, really bad place that ended up taking me to rehab. So I totally get how that goes. Mm-hmm. And I can empathize because it's a natural thing to think, I want to silence this. I want to quiet this, and maybe some substance will help, right?
Right. You want to self-medicate and soothe the high, bring those highs down and bring the lows up. And when you don't have insight into what's going on, you tend to kind of gravitate towards doing that any way you can. But we both know it only makes the matter, much worse. So it doesn't lead to a good endpoint.
So at that point in your life, your family knew that this was going on, but you hadn't really shared this with anyone else. How long of a period from when you started, getting help and you were diagnosed and taking medication? How much time passed between that and when you decided to kind of come out, if you will, more broadly about this?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I kept it a secret, even from many members of my family. Only people who kind of had to know knew about it, until it was just this past year I started being more vocal about it. So it's been a good, 19, 20 years that I've been keeping this private. I just kind of reached that point where I thought, no more. This is part of who I am. You can't, it feels almost like cutting off an arm to keep something a secret. You just want to live fully and be seen for who you really are. And that was a part of my life. Bipolar was a part of me.
Why did you feel like you had to keep it secret? I mean, what was it that you were afraid of people? Were you afraid of people knowing, or were you afraid of the reactions or how they would treat you?
I think, that it was the stigma that kept me quiet for so long. I grew up in a very tight-knit, Southern, traditional type of community, and mental health was never talked about. In it, I remained almost in denial about my illness because I couldn't bear the thought of how others would treat me. But I think if you dig a little bit deeper, the underlying issue there is how your view of yourself will change if you speak your truth and come out. And that's far scarier than sometimes, how others will treat you, is how you live with yourself with this newfound, embracing of the truth.
Yeah, you mentioned in the blog post that you wrote about coming out, this idea of unconditional self-acceptance. And I was kind of curious, what does that look like? How does someone become aware that they haven't accepted themselves? And then how does someone get to the point where they are willing to do so?
I think it wasn't until I was working in mental health that I started kind of feeling like I was living this double life. And here I was encouraging my patients to reach out and seek help. Yet here I was not doing that. And I think what kind of tipped the scale and sort of pushed me a little bit towards self-acceptance was when I was asking my family for, should I come out about my mental health? And they told me no. And I thought, wait a minute, if I were diabetic and I wanted to discuss my frustration over having to take insulin or check my blood sugar, you all would have no problem with me sharing it. But when it's about mental health, all of a sudden it should be kept quiet. And I wanted to own who I was, and accept the fact that mental illness is a part of me. And that's unconditional self-acceptance. It's not a place you get to. It's a practice. It's a lived thing. You have to kind of dig within every single day. That self-judgment that comes up for shaming you for your struggles, just reminding yourself to accept who you are, where you are. And it's a learning process. It never ends. It's constantly, we're all a work in progress at that, I think.
Was there any kind of defining moment where along the path, self-acceptance, where you maybe made the decision to decide to share about your, to come out about being bipolar?
Yeah, it was that moment when I got the advice to keep it quiet. I think it really gave me that extra push. And maybe it was just kind of a rebellious streak in me, but it brought to light, like, wow, it feels like I'm trying to be silenced almost. And that was really a really uncomfortable feeling. By telling me I shouldn't share, you're telling me I should be ashamed of that part of myself. And when you are faced with that, you kind of, you're at a crossroads, and you can choose to kind of continue to live in shame, or you can choose to accept who you are and speak your truth. And it's what gave me the extra courage I needed to come forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And what was kind of the feeling you had the first time you wanted to tell everyone? Was it more of that rebellion, or was it more of I want to be able to accept myself? Or where did that feeling really originate from, the desire to want to tell everybody?
It was when I was feeling like I couldn't quite be myself. I was at work, I would kind of feel like I was always censoring myself. I wanted to share my stories with my coworkers, or share some of my knowledge base with them from personal experience. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself do it. And it's a really uncomfortable feeling to have to kind of censor yourself like that. We all want to speak authentically, and when you feel like you can't just be yourself, it weighs heavily on you. And it was kind of like equate it to being sort of like the slow burning ember, or this, boiling pot on the back burner that just was constantly simmering for me until I finally decided to speak up. And when I finally did, it was this huge relief. I was like this sigh, like, oh my gosh, like people know who I am now. I can be myself.
Right. Yeah. I kind of felt the same. I mean, I sort of wrote a blog post myself, a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, that explained the things that I'd been through and what I'd done. And man, nothing was more freeing than just putting it all out there and saying, you know what, if somebody wants to hate me or judge me because of something I've done, then I mean, you know what, so be it.
Exactly.
But I'm just going to own the things I've lived through, and I'm going to move on with my life.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is. It's very freeing. And the thing is there can be fallout from it. You do have to be prepared to face possible consequences. Maybe not everybody's going to see it the same way as you, depending on, you can't control other people's reactions. And it's kind of releasing that control and being like, I'm going to stay honest to myself no matter what the reaction is. As long as it's coming from a place that's honest and authentic, you'll land on the right. It will land you on the right path.
Yeah. I can't say, I mean, look, I struggle with this thought that I'll never know if me telling my story has hurt me, because the people that are ignoring me or not responding to me or not interacting with me, they're not telling me. So I don't know if it's because I told my story, but the benefit that I got from getting that off my chest and being honest with myself was life-changing.
It is life-changing. I mean, I don't quite know how to describe it, but stepping forward kind of into that light is so empowering. And one of the things that really rewarded me was that some people, started coming forward and sharing their stories with me and their struggles. And I was really humbled. And I thought, God, that's what it's all about. I was honored that people would want to come forward and share. And I'm like, this is how you end stigma, bit by bit, and leading by example, and encouraging others to come forward.
It's really funny you say that, because for me, when I wrote my blog post and put it out there, I didn't intend to turn it into anything. I didn't intend for it to become the catalyst that would change my life. But because of it, and all the people that reached out to me and said, you know what, you've encouraged me to share my story, or people who reached out and they were encouraging to me, that spawned this podcast. That spawned my business. Everything that's happening in my life, it originated from the moment that I decided to tell everybody what I had done and what I had been through.
Yes. It's funny that you say that, because I kind of, from there, I decided that I wanted to kind of submit my story and share it with a bigger audience than just kind of on my personal blog. And then I created a new blog I just wanted to devote to mental health and kind of sharing my continued experience with it. And it's led me, here today to be able to talk about it. And it's, it opens the doors that kind of light the path that you really were meant to be on. And it's very empowering.
What do you think we can do to encourage other people to share? I mean, what do we have to do to overcome that mental health was never talked about vibe that a lot of us, look, I grew up in a Southern Baptist Christian family, and, we didn't talk about a lot of these things. And,
Right.
How do we overcome that and encourage people? I mean, obviously sharing our stories, but what else can we be doing?
I think there's two parts to that. One, stigma starts young. So educating your children, talking about mental health to them is key. We need to normalize that conversation and talk about how it's important to protect your mental health just as we care for our physical health. But in order to do that, you really need to kind of examine your own feelings about mental health, especially if you come from a family where it wasn't talked about. It can be an uncomfortable conversation for people. So it's really just kind of doing that self-reflection, coming to terms with your own views of it, and then having that conversation with a younger generation or vulnerable people will go a long way towards helping that.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, another thing we need to do is stop demonizing medication. I think that, and that's a tricky one because it's so often played out in Hollywood and movies where, medication is the kind of the thing that everyone wants to try to avoid, or people can only be creative when they're off of their medication. You know what I mean? It's a tricky one, but to stop making that the enemy, because it's creating a lot of fear, and medication for me is paramount to me living a functional life. There's no reason to fear it. So normalizing medication also would help.
I agree. Like, I take lithium, and I feel like, if I miss a dosage, like if I miss an evening or a morning dosage, I find myself less productive. I mean, I feel like the medication is it's a great tool for me. It allows me to harness a lot of the positive benefits of the way I am, and it allows me to mitigate almost all of the negative consequences of the way that I am. And it's made me, I think, more productive. And so I think, I agree with you. We've got to find a way to destigmatize medication around this, because there's actually a lot of really positive traits that come with being this way. And the medication can help you maximize those while negating the downside.
Exactly. Yeah. It can take, medication doesn't change the core of who you are. It just helps bring it into balance so that you can use your gifts. And so many patients I don't know, quite understand it, don't want to take medication. And it's, I always say it's like, look at it as a diabetic taking insulin. It's something that you constantly have to kind of pay attention to, and maybe you'll have to change the dose. Maybe you'll have to take more sometimes, or maybe you can go down other times, but in response to your life circumstances and situations. But it's a tool, and it will help you be your best self and be productive. I wouldn't be here if medication didn't play a role in my life.
What other sort of support structure is in your life other than medication? I mean, do you have any support groups? Do you have any wellness practices in your life? What do you see a therapist, psychiatrist? So kind of what does your support structure look like?
Yeah, I see a therapist, and I've been seeing for years. I think medication and therapy kind of should go hand in hand. And then one thing I do is I keep a daily mood chart, and that has been very helpful. It's not perfect by any means, because, when you're manic, you don't realize you're manic. So you're not going to kind of mark that
right.
You're experiencing all these elevated symptoms on the mood chart. But in hindsight, it will help you to go back and be like, oh, my appetite did go down here. I stopped sleeping so much. And yeah, that was probably some red flags. And that has helped I bring my mood chart to my psychiatrist every month, and we review it and make changes based on that. So it's been really, really helpful. Again, not perfect, but it's definitely a tool. And psych patients, we're not the best historians. It's kind of, I go into my psychiatrist's office, and maybe I had a horrible month, and that day I happened to be feling okay. And she'd say, so how are you doing? I said, oh, I'm fine.
Exactly.
And then, but the truth was I wasn't fine. The previous month was a complete mess, and it holds you to be accountable for the reality of how you've actually been doing.
It'd be cool if there was a way to sort of automate tracking that or measuring that, because a lot of times I go into my psychiatrist's office and I feel like the exact same thing. He asked me, so how's your mood been over the last couple of months? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm doing okay today. I'm here. Like, I got out of bed and I came here. So pretty good right now, actually. And that doesn't give him any insight into what's happened and what the cycles have been and how my life has been over the last couple of months. I wish there was a way to measure it or track it.
I do too. I mean, it one that wasn't subjective, because like I was saying, you don't realize you're experiencing these kind of manic red flags sometimes, or even depressive red flags. Although I think the depressive episodes are easier to identify because they're so uncomfortable to be in. But yeah, it would be nice if we could get to a place where there was some sort of direct feed to our psychiatrist that could monitor how we were doing, the reality of how we're doing instead of what we want to project. But anyway, keeping a paper chart, it has been helpful, and it helps increase the insight a little bit, I think, to how I'm doing it. It makes me pause and think about it at the end of each day, where maybe normally I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's interesting because I get worried sometimes when I feel elevated because something happened, positive.
Mhm.
I don't. Sometimes I find myself sitting there wondering, is this normal? Is this a normal elevated feeling, or is this my thing? Like, am I having an issue right now? I feel like I'm still learning how to process my own emotions, especially the positive emotions.
I am too. And I think one of the things that's really hard is it's kind of broken down the trust. Like, can I trust this feeling? Is this coming from a place that's authentic, or is this coming from a place that's not balanced? And that's really hard. You always want to tell people, don't, make life-changing decisions when you're manic, or when you're depressed, but it's hard to, sometimes it's hard to know, if this is a true feeling or if this is just a symptom. And that's kind of scary that goes along with bipolar disorder. And it's something I'm still learning. I don't know if I'll ever really have it figured out. I think that's just kind of part of the illness, and learning how to kind of keep perspective and maybe say, okay, well, I want to make this decision right now. If I still want to make it in another week, then that's more telling of it being genuine and not just kind of me going into a high or a low, or whatever you may call it.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was a little bit more about the blog post. So what led you to submit your story to NAMI and publish it there? I mean, is there a program for that, or is it a normal thing? Can other people share their story that way? How did that work?
Yes. No, everyone can submit a story to be shared. For me, when I got such tremendous positive feedback from posting on my blog, and I found it very inspiring. And I thought, gosh, if so many people were touched by it, then, I should put myself out there and share, and maybe more people can be helped if I share and submit the work. So it was all about kind of trying to reach a bigger audience. And sometimes we have to put ourselves out of our comfort zone to do that. I'm normally a very shy and quiet and kind of withdrawn person. So for me to take those steps, it was a big deal. But I got the courage from the positivity that I received from making that initial blog post public.
And I mentioned it earlier briefly, but when you made the first blog post public, you mentioned at some point that you'd kind of woken up in the middle of the night and that you had this anxiety and you wanted to take it down. What did you expect the response to be from people?
I was hoping that the response would be positive, but we all kind of have tapes that we play in our mind of that kind of negative voice. And I started thinking, oh my gosh, people are going to think I want sympathy, or they're going to, my longtime friends from school will probably be like, oh, this all makes sense now. But new friends may be spooked by it and keep their distance. And my mind just started kind of running away with itself of all these negative things that could happen. And that's what kind of caused me to wake up in a cold sweat and be like, okay, no, I changed my mind. But by then, the positivity was already coming in. So I thought I would just leave it. But for someone who just was used to kind of keeping quiet and taking that leap, your mind does kind of want to jump to all the worst case scenarios. And it's hard to quiet that.
Yeah, I think I was most fearful that nobody would respond. I was fearful that new people in my life would go, oh, wait a second, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I was fearful that people from my past would just say, I knew there's something wrong with you. Now I don't have to ever talk to you again because there is something wrong with you.
Right.
And that no one would say anything. Like, that was my biggest fear.
I can see that too. Yeah, I think that probably ran through my mind too. I was scared people would possibly dismiss it as just being like, oh, here's just someone else griping about their mental health, or they're griping or they're complaining. And I didn't want to come across as complaining. I wanted to come from a place that was genuine. And I think that when people sense that, they will respond. People are drawn to what's truthful and genuine from other people, and because we want to connect with others.
And kind of the final thing I want to ask, and I try to ask everyone this, is stigma broadly. What can people be doing on a micro level? What can each person be doing to reduce the stigma to the point where, it's normal in society to talk about these things, as opposed to kind of have to feel like you have to delete the blog post after you post it?
Mm-hmm. I would say, it's making small decisions like checking in with your friends. When you see someone, going through grief, ask them how are you grieving? Kind of normalize putting the support out there for other people, because it's mental health still for a lot is something that people are shy to talk about. And just, by being open and honest with others and also inquiring after how they're doing, will encourage them to share. And I think it is changing because more people are coming forward and we are sharing our stories, and it's becoming more normal to talk about how important it is to discuss our mental health. So things are going in the right direction, but just some people get, uncomfortable around strong emotions, and instead of shying away from that, we need to lean into it and be there for other people. Even if we don't know what to say, you don't have to say anything. Just be present and validate their own experience, and that will help.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for spending the time. I mean, this has been incredible. I think this is going to help a lot of people around this topic, whether it's coming out about their own story or whether it's seeking help for the first time, whether it's destigmatizing medication or how to get well. I'm really grateful that you took the time to do this. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. It was an honor. I'm so happy I got to do it.
Thank you again, Elizabeth, for being here today. As someone who also struggles with bipolar and has had to watch my own family dealing with me, I think that this resource, this podcast, will be really helpful to people who need help, but also to the family members of those who are out there who may need help. So I think this conversation is going to be a great resource. Thank you for doing it. Many people suffer from these mental health differences, and they're just afraid to ask for help. They're afraid to share their experiences or talk to loved ones. And us getting on here and doing this, I think, is helpful, or I hope it's helpful. So yeah, thank you. And to our listeners, it'd be really awesome if you could give us a rating or a review, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or whatever platform you're using to listen. It helps our show, helps us grow, helps us to, reduce stigma even further with a larger audience. If you have any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. And you can connect to us on Twitter at StigmaCast, and you can find us on our website at stigmapodcast.com. Until next time, thanks for being here.